Imagine a hero so strong that even the earth seemed to hold its breath when he walked. And yet, his life was shaped not by victory, but by quiet sorrow. Tonight, we drift into the mist-covered hills of ancient Ireland, where warriors fought not only enemies, but fate itself. Among them lived Cú Chulainn, a boy who became a legend too early, and a legend who never learned how to grow old. His story is not loud or triumphant. It is slow, gentle, and strangely lonely, like the fading echo of footsteps on wet grass beneath a grey Celtic sky. Long before the world felt loud and hurried, there was a land where stories moved slowly, carried by firelight and quiet voices. In that land, heroes were not always triumphant, and strength often led to sorrow. One such story belongs to a boy who would become a warrior, and a warrior who would never truly rest. This is not a tale of glory shouted across battlefields, but one of inevitability, duty, and gentle tragedy unfolding over a lifetime. Cú Chulainn was not born with a destiny he chose. Like many figures of ancient myth, his life was shaped before he could understand it. He was born as Satana, a quiet child in a world governed by prophecy and honor. Even as a boy, there was something different about him, something unsettled, as if the future already pressed lightly against his shoulders. The world of ancient Ireland was slow and grounded in ritual. People lived close to the land. Seasons mattered more than years. Strength was admired, but restraint was respected. Heroes were not simply fighters. They were bound by rules, oaths, and social expectations that left little room for freedom. As a child, Satana lived among adults who spoke of warriors and raids, cattle and borders. Violence existed, but it was formal, almost ceremonial. Conflict followed patterns. Honor mattered as much as victory. To break one's word was worse than losing one's life. From an early age, Satana showed unusual skill. His body was small, but his focus was sharp. He moved differently, noticed things others missed. Elders watched him with curiosity, sometimes with concern. Talent was a gift, but also a warning. In the old world, those marked by greatness were often marked by suffering as well. The first moment that shaped his future came quietly. He was still young when he visited the house of the smith Cullen. A fierce guard dog protected the home, trained to attack strangers. Through a simple mistake of timing and custom, the dog attacked the boy. What followed was sudden and irreversible. Satana defended himself, killing the hound. The act was not cruel, but necessary. Still, the consequences were heavy. The dog was valuable, loyal, and irreplaceable. Rather than flee or deny responsibility, the boy made a promise. He would take the place of the hound. He would guard Cullen's house until a new protector could be trained. This promise earned him a new name, Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Cullen. Names mattered deeply in Celtic tradition. A name was not just a label, but a binding force. From that moment, the boy's identity shifted. He was no longer simply a child. He had accepted duty early, without complaint. As he grew, his reputation spread. Stories of his speed, strength, and focus moved slowly through the land. Yet beneath the admiration was unease. Prophecies followed him like shadows. It was said he would live a short life, but one filled with unmatched fame. In Celtic myth, knowing the future did not grant control over it. Fate was accepted, not challenged. Even Cú Chulainn, aware of his destiny, walked toward it without resistance. This acceptance gave the stories their quiet sadness. Training came early and intensely. He traveled to distant lands to learn the ways of combat, discipline, and restraint. His teacher, the warrior woman Celtic, shaped him into something more than human, yet warned him of the cost. Power, once gained, could not be set aside. Cú Chulainn returned home changed. He was stronger, faster, and more dangerous than any before him. Yet he remained bound by the same rules as everyone else: hospitality, honor, and obligation. The tragedy of his life did not come from a single moment, but from accumulation. Each promise kept narrowed his path. Each victory removed another choice. He became famous, and fame demanded more. Even in moments of peace, tension lingered. He could not escape what he was becoming. The warrior's life offered no rest, only movement toward an ending already known. This is how his story begins, not with a roar of battle, but with a quiet acceptance of duty. A child stepping into responsibility, a name that carried both protection and loss. And as the world around him continued its slow rhythm of seasons and rituals, Cú Chulainn walked forward, unaware that every step brought him closer to a fate he could not outrun. As Cú Chulainn grew into his role, the land of Ulster settled into an uneasy balance. Kingdoms did not expand quickly in those days. Borders shifted slowly, marked more by cattle raids than by open war. Strength was measured not by conquest, but by the ability to protect what already existed. Ulster depended on its warriors, yet most of them were ordinary men bound by age, injury, and fear. Cú Chulainn stood apart. His presence alone changed how others thought about safety. Where he stood, enemies hesitated. Yet even as he became a protector, he was never allowed to feel fully at ease. He lived under the shadow of Gisa's sacred personal taboos that governed his actions. Some forbade him from eating certain foods. Others demanded hospitality at all times. These rules were meant to preserve balance, but they also trapped him. Each obligation increased the chance of conflict between duty and survival. When danger approached, Cú Chulainn responded alone more often than not. His youth and speed made him ideal for sudden defense. He did not complain. Solitude became familiar to him. Companionship, by contrast, felt distant and fleeting. The most unsettling aspect of his nature was the rheostrad, the warp spasm. When pushed beyond restraint, his body transformed. Muscles twisted, one eye sank while the other bulged. His form became unrecognizable. This state brought unmatched power, but it also removed control. Friends feared it as much as enemies did. After battle, silence followed. The warrior returned to himself, exhausted and ashamed. No celebration erased the memory of what he had become. Power carried isolation. Stories of his victories spread quietly. They were told without exaggeration, almost reluctantly. People admired him, but also stepped aside. It is difficult to grow close to someone shaped by prophecy. Cú Chulainn did not seek leadership or praise. He followed rules strictly, honoring hospitality even when it endangered him. These choices slowly tightened the boundaries of his life. Every obligation honored was another thread binding him to fate. Love came briefly. His relationships were intense but short-lived. His life allowed no space for permanence. Even those closest to him sensed that his path did not include peace. Meanwhile, beyond Ulster, other kingdoms watched and waited. Power invites challenge. Queen Meb of Connaught began to gather strength, drawn by pride and rivalry. Her ambitions would soon test Ulster's fragile stability. As tensions rose, Cú Chulainn stood ready. Though readiness never brought comfort. He was young, yet already burdened by expectation. The people relied on him completely, a dangerous dependence. In the quiet moments between conflicts, he walked the land alone. Rivers, hills, and borders became familiar companions. These solitary journeys were the closest he came to rest. He knew, as all heroes of his world did, that greatness shortened life. The knowledge did not frighten him. It simply existed, like the coming of winter. Thus his rise was steady, uncelebrated, and heavy with consequence. Each act of protection brought him closer to the center of events he could not escape. The land remained quiet for a time, but stillness in myth never lasts. And in that silence, fate prepared to move. The conflict that would define Cú Chulainn's life did not begin with noise or urgency. It began quietly, through pride, comparison, and words spoken behind walls. In Connaught, Queen Meb measured her wealth against her husband's and found it lacking by a single bull. In a world where status was counted in cattle, this imbalance could not be ignored. To correct it, Meb gathered an army. The invasion was planned methodically, not with rage but with patience. Warriors assembled. Supplies were prepared. The land waited. Ulster, meanwhile, was vulnerable. Its warriors were struck by a curse that left them weakened at the moment they were needed most. All except one. Cú Chulainn, still young, remained untouched. He did not celebrate this. He understood what it meant. He would stand alone against an army. Meb's forces crossed into Ulster slowly, almost ceremonially. They expected resistance. Instead, they found only one defender, standing at the borders, calm and unmoving. Cú Chulainn invoked ancient custom. He demanded single combat at fords and narrow crossings. Tradition required Meb's warriors to honor the challenge. One by one, they stepped forward. The days passed in repetition. A warrior would arrive, words would be exchanged, combat would follow. Victory was swift and often fatal. Bodies accumulated quietly along the riverbanks. Between battles, Cú Chulainn rested briefly. He bound wounds, ate sparingly, and waited. There was no celebration, no relief, only continuation. Meb grew frustrated. Each delay weakened her momentum, yet tradition bound her as well. To ignore the challenges would shame her cause. The land bore witness. Rivers ran calmly. Birds returned to branches. Nature remained unchanged by human struggle. Cú Chulainn's endurance became legend even as it unfolded. He did not fight for glory. He fought because duty demanded it. Each duel drained him further. The warp spasm returned more often now. His body strained under constant violence. Recovery grew slower. Pain lingered. Night offered little rest. Dreams were filled with echoes of combat. Dawn brought another challenger. Meb attempted to break the pattern. She sent champions stronger, older, and more cunning. Each fell. Yet every victory isolated Cú Chulainn further. He stood alone, surrounded by enemies and expectation. This was not triumph. It was attrition. As the invasion dragged on, the land itself seemed tired. Grass flattened under marching feet. Rivers carried memories of blood without complaint. The boy who once accepted responsibility now carried the weight of an entire kingdom. And still, he stood. The tragedy was not that he might fall, but that survival demanded he continued. Thus the war settled into a quiet rhythm challenge. Combat, silence repeated endlessly, until even legend grew weary. And beyond the fords, fate waited patiently, knowing time was on its side. Time passed differently during the invasion. Days stretched, not marked by victory or defeat, but by endurance. Cú Chulainn remained at the borders, defending Ulster one challenge at a time. His body continued to move, but rest became something remembered rather than experienced. Wounds healed slowly now. Bruises darkened and lingered. His strength remained extraordinary, but it no longer felt effortless. Each morning required intention. Each movement carried weight. Still, he did not step aside. The traditions that governed war also governed mercy. When a warrior came forward, Cú Chulainn met him fairly. If someone asked for time, he granted it. If a challenger fought bravely, he honored them in death. These customs slowed the war but preserved dignity. They also prolonged his burden. Queen Meb watched carefully. She admired him, even as she sought to defeat him. Power recognized power. Yet admiration did not soften ambition. Instead, it sharpened strategy. She began to test his limits, not just through combat, but through obligation. Hospitality was sacred. If Cú Chulainn accepted food from someone, he could not refuse them respect. If he honored a request, he bound himself further. Slowly, situations arose where his gisa, his sacred taboos, came into conflict. One demanded that he never refuse food offered by a woman. Another forbade him from eating certain meats. Meb understood this balance well. The breaking point did not arrive with violence, but with kindness. An old woman approached him, offering food cooked beside the road. Refusing her would violate hospitality. Accepting would violate his guess. There was no correct choice. Cú Chulainn paused. He understood the weight of the moment. Prophecy had warned him this day would come not loudly, but gently, as inevitability. He accepted the food. The act was quiet. There was no thunder, no sudden collapse. Nothing visibly changed. And yet, something had shifted. A thread had been cut. From that moment on, weakness followed him like a shadow. His strength remained, but it no longer replenished fully. Recovery took longer. Pain settled deeper. Still, he did not retreat. The fighting continued. Duels blurred together. Faces lost distinction. His movements grew more deliberate, conserving energy. The warp spasm came less often now, as if even that transformation demanded more than his body could give. Meanwhile, Ulster's warriors slowly recovered from their curse. Relief approached, but not fast enough to spare him further strain. Cú Chulainn felt no anger toward Meb. Blame had no place in his understanding of fate. What was meant to happen would happen. His role was simply to fulfill his part. At night, he sat alone, listening to wind through grass and water against stone. These sounds grounded him. They reminded him of the land he protected, not the war itself. His youth faded quietly. He aged not by years, but by effort. Others might have retreated, demanded relief, or surrendered responsibility. Cú Chulainn did none of these. He remained present, steady, and aware. The tragedy deepened, not through betrayal, but through endurance beyond reason. Victory approached, but at a cost already paid in advance. And though the war would soon end, its weight had already settled into his bones. What remained was not fear of death, but the quiet knowledge that the end, once distant, now walked beside him. At last, the long weakness that held the warriors of Ulster began to fade. One by one, strength returned to them like warmth after a long winter. Muscles steadied. Voices grew firm again. The land, which had relied on a single defender, slowly remembered the presence of many. Yet, the return did not immediately bring relief to Cú Chulainn. By the time others could stand beside him, his body had already endured more than it was meant to carry. The change was noticeable only in small ways. He moved more carefully. He rested longer between breaths. Silence followed him more often than before. The army of Connaught sensed the shift as well. The invasion had stretched far beyond its beginning. What was once a confident advance had become a prolonged waiting. Supplies dwindled. Morale thinned. Even Queen Meb understood that time was no longer on her side. Still, there remained one final gathering of strength. Ulster's warriors assembled for open battle. For the first time since the invasion began, Cú Chulainn did not stand alone at the border. Others formed lines beside him, shields steady, expressions focused. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt distance. The rhythm of solitary combat had shaped his days so completely that shared effort felt unfamiliar. He remained calm, but quieter than ever. The battle itself unfolded quickly compared to the long weeks before it. Where duels once delayed progress, now many fought at once. Noise replaced stillness. The land that had known repeated single encounters now carried the echo of full conflict. Cú Chulainn fought among them, not ahead of them. His movements were precise rather than overwhelming. He chose efficiency over force. Those watching closely saw the difference, though none spoke of it. Victory came not as triumph, but as conclusion. Connaught's army withdrew slowly, accepting what endurance had decided. The cattle that had begun the conflict were no longer the focus. The war simply ended because it could no longer continue. When silence returned, it felt heavier than the fighting. The fields bore marks of passage, but life resumed almost immediately. Repairs began. Animals returned to grazing. Daily rhythms restored themselves without ceremony. Cú Chulainn did not celebrate. He walked the same paths he had guarded, now empty. Rivers flowed without interruption. No challengers waited at the fords. People praised him quietly, respectfully. Yet admiration did not comfort him. The purpose that had filled each day was gone. What remained was fatigue and awareness. Peace revealed what battle concealed. Injuries long ignored demanded attention. His strength, though still remarkable, did not fully return. The breaking of his guests had taken something permanent. He spent time among his people, but never fully within the moment. Conversations passed around him like wind around stone. He listened more than he spoke. The prophecy of a short life had always existed in the background. Now it felt closer, though no specific day announced itself. He accepted it, as he accepted all things with stillness. Others believed the danger had passed. Ulster was safe. The enemy had retreated. Yet fate, in such stories, rarely ends with peace. It waits until calm settles completely. Cú Chulainn continued his duties, though less urgently. Patrols replaced battles. Watchfulness replaced defense. The land no longer needed constant protection, but he remained attentive out of habit. Seasons changed. Marks of conflict faded under weather and time. Only memory held them clearly. In this quiet, the hero's role shifted. No longer the lone defender, he became a figure observed, respected, and gently distanced. Greatness often separates even when danger has passed. He understood this without resentment. His life had always moved toward an ending, not a reward. And as peace deepened across Ulster, the final chapter approached not with warning, but with patience. For destiny, once delayed, always returns. Peace settled over Ulster, but peace did not bring stillness to Cú Chulainn's thoughts. The land returned to its ordinary rhythm: cattle grazing, smoke rising from hearths, voices carrying softly across fields. For others, this was relief. For him, it was unfamiliar, quiet. Without constant danger, time felt wider. Hours stretched. The body, no longer forced into urgency, revealed its exhaustion. Old injuries spoke more clearly. Movements once effortless now required attention. Nothing dramatic had changed, yet everything felt heavier. He continued his patrols out of habit. Each morning he walked the same borders he had once defended alone. The rivers flowed gently, no longer marked by challenge. Grass had grown where warriors once stood. Nature did not remember conflict, it simply resumed. During these walks, small signs appeared. Birds lifted suddenly from empty ground. Dogs barked at nothing visible. Wind shifted direction without warning. These were not threats, but omens: quiet disturbances in ordinary patterns. In his world, such changes carried meaning. Cú Chulainn did not fear them, he observed them with calm acceptance. Prophecy had long ago promised a short life filled with renown. The renown had come. The remaining portion approached gradually, like evening after afternoon. His Giza remained, though weakened. Obligations still shaped his choices. Hospitality, respect, and restraint governed even simple actions. These rules had protected honor throughout his life, yet now they narrowed his path more than ever. Each decision felt predetermined. Visitors came often in peaceful times, travelers, messengers, neighbors seeking advice. He welcomed them all, offering food and safety as tradition required. Even in fatigue, he did not refuse anyone. To refuse would mean abandoning the structure that defined him. One evening, while resting beside a road, he met strangers who treated him with unusual politeness. Their words carried layered meanings, respectful yet heavy. He sensed intention beneath courtesy, but did not challenge it. Custom demanded trust until broken openly. After they left, silence lingered longer than usual. The air felt still, as if waiting. He remained seated, watching the horizon without urgency. Awareness did not change action. It only deepened understanding. Days later, another obligation appeared. A request for aid in a distant place, minor, ordinary, easily accepted. He agreed without hesitation. Refusal was not part of his nature. Yet even as he spoke the promise, he understood how promises shaped outcomes more than swords ever had. The journey toward that duty was slow. Along the path, more signs appeared. A wheel breaking unexpectedly, a horse stumbling without cause, clouds gathering then dissolving. None prevented him from continuing. They simply accompanied him. Those around him noticed a quiet change. He spoke less, listened longer. There was no sadness, only completion. Like a season nearing its end, he moved with gentle certainty. At night he rested lightly, waking often, not from fear, but from attentiveness. The world felt sharper, sounds clearer, as though every detail wished to be remembered. He visited familiar places during these days, the ford, the training ground, the fields beyond the settlement. He lingered nowhere for long. Each stop was acknowledgement rather than farewell. When asked about his thoughts, he answered simply, "There was work to do. There was always work to do." The simplicity comforted others, though they could not name why. The land itself remained calm. No armies gathered. No warnings spread. Life appeared ordinary, which made the quiet signs more meaningful. Fate rarely announces itself loudly. It arranges circumstances gently, leaving choices intact, yet inevitable. Cú Chulainn understood this. He had always understood. His life was never about avoiding destiny, only meeting it properly. As the days passed, obligations aligned carefully. Invitations, requests, and encounters formed a path he followed without resistance. Each step felt natural, though none were accidental. He did not prepare weapons obsessively. He did not seek protection. Instead, he maintained routine, walking, speaking as always. The steadiness itself was preparation. Those closest to him sensed distance but not loss. He remained present, attentive, and calm. Only the weight behind his silence had deepened. Evening light lingered longer one day as he watched the horizon. The sky carried the same colors it always had, yet he studied them as if memorizing their order. The end of his story did not rush forward. It approached with patience, shaped by promises already spoken. And so he continued, step by step, along a path that had been waiting since the day he accepted his name, moving not toward surprise, but toward completion. The final days did not feel different to those around Cú Chulainn. The village moved through its routines as it always had. Fires were lit at dawn, animals were tended, and voices carried gently across open ground. Yet for him, time seemed more deliberate, each moment distinct rather than passing unnoticed. He rose early, before others stirred, and walked toward the edges of the land. The air was cool and still. Mist gathered above the grass, softening the shapes of hills and trees. He had walked these paths many times, yet now he paused more often, listening to the quiet rather than moving through it. Encounters continued to shape his days. Travelers crossed his path, offering greetings and small conversations. He answered kindly, though he spoke little. Words felt unnecessary. Presence alone seemed enough. One afternoon he was invited to share a meal. The invitation was ordinary, offered politely, and refusing would have been He accepted without hesitation. Hospitality remained sacred, even when it complicated his choices. The food was simple and warm. Those around him noticed his calm manner and steady attention. He ate slowly, neither hurried nor distracted. The act carried weight beyond nourishment, though no one named it aloud. Afterward, as he continued his journey, his strength felt subtly altered, not gone, not diminished entirely, but quieter. Movements required greater care. He adjusted naturally, as one does when carrying something fragile. Along the road he met others who challenged him with respectful formality. Tradition required, he answered. Even in peace, a warrior could not ignore a call to test skill. He accepted, not out of desire, but out of adherence to order. The combat was brief. He prevailed, yet victory brought no sense of achievement. He simply continued walking afterward, leaving the moment behind as easily as he had entered it. Clouds moved across the sky, casting slow shadows over the fields. He followed a familiar route toward open ground where he had trained in youth. The place was empty now. Grass covered old marks, and wind passed freely where voices once gathered. He remained there a long while, standing without purpose beyond awareness. There was no attempt to hold the moment, only recognition. As evening approached, he prepared himself with quiet care. Weapons were checked, not with urgency, but with respect for habit. Each motion followed memory. No adjustment was needed. Messengers came with news of rising tension nearby. Minor conflict, nothing large, yet enough to call him forward once more. He listened calmly and agreed to go. Refusal was never a consideration. Before leaving, he spoke briefly with those closest to him. The conversation was ordinary, simple instructions, small reassurances. Nothing suggested finality, yet each word carried a steadiness that lingered after he departed. He traveled alone. The path ahead was familiar, bordered by low hills and scattered trees. Wind moved through branches in slow rhythm. The world neither warned nor resisted him. Night approached gradually, the sky dimming without sudden change. He continued forward, neither hastening nor delaying. Fatigue was present, but it did not weaken his resolve. At a quiet place beside standing stones, he paused. The ground felt steady beneath him. Here he waited, knowing others would soon arrive. Not enemies exactly, but participants in what had long been forming. He rested briefly, leaning against the stone, eyes open to the fading light. There was no fear, only awareness that movement was nearing its end. When footsteps finally approached, he stood ready, not eager, not reluctant, simply prepared. The final moments had begun, not with shock, but with recognition, and in the deepening dusk, Cú Chulainn faced what had always been part of his path, meeting it with the same calm that had guided every step before. The figures who approached did not rush. Their pace was measured, almost respectful, as though they too understood the weight of the moment. The evening air had grown still, and even the wind seemed to move around the place rather than through it. Cú Chulainn stood beside the stone and waited, neither calling out nor stepping forward. In his world, meetings like this followed an order older than memory. Words came before weapons. Recognition came before action. The men who arrived greeted him formally, naming themselves and acknowledging him by name. Their voices were steady. No one pretended this was an ordinary encounter. He listened, nodding once in acceptance. There was no anger in him. Each of them had obligations, just as he did. What happened next belonged not to hatred, but to duty. They circled slowly, giving him space to stand away from the stone. He moved forward a few steps, placing himself on open ground. The grass bent beneath his feet. He felt the firmness of the earth and steadied his breathing. The first exchange was brief. Spears moved quickly, testing distance rather than striking decisively. He deflected them with practiced precision. Even now, weakened, his skill remained clear. Each motion was economical, conserving effort. More attacks followed. He responded calmly, turning aside blows and stepping carefully to maintain balance. There was no rush in his movements. Those watching could see that he was not fighting for survival alone, but to fulfill the expectation placed upon him since youth. The struggle continued longer than anyone anticipated. Though strength had left him in part, discipline remained. He did not waste motion. He did not pursue advantage recklessly. Each breath was deliberate. A spear struck him at last, glancing rather than piercing deeply. He adjusted his stance and continued. Pain registered but did not distract. For a moment, all sound narrowed to the rhythm of movement and breath. Another strike followed, and this time the wound held. He staggered slightly, then regained footing. The men paused, uncertain whether he would fall. Instead, he straightened again. Cú Chulainn understood what remained. The body could no longer sustain long effort. yet standing mattered more than victory. He stepped back toward the tall stone behind him and placed his hand upon it. Slowly, he tied himself to the stone, using the strap from his gear, securing his body upright. The gesture was quiet, practical, and unmistakable. He would not meet the ground while life remained. The men hesitated. None wished to strike a fallen opponent, yet he had ensured he would not fall. Bound to the stone, he faced them, eyes steady in the fading light. They resumed cautiously. Weapons struck again, each blow more decisive than the last. He did not move to counter now. His role had shifted from defense to endurance. The sky darkened gradually. Colors faded into muted gray. Through it all, he remained upright, supported by stone and will. Breath grew slower. His gaze remained forward. At length, silence settled. The attackers stepped back, uncertain whether life still lingered. No motion came from him. The air felt suspended. They waited a long while before approaching fully. Only when a bird landed upon his shoulder did they understand the stillness had become final. The stone held him even in death, exactly as he intended. He had remained standing. No cheer followed. No triumph was spoken. The men lowered their weapons in acknowledgement rather than celebration. They had not defeated merely a warrior, but completed a moment long foretold. Night closed around the field. Wind returned softly across the grass. The place grew quiet again, as though nothing had disturbed it. His body stayed upright until morning light revealed the calm expression upon his face. Those who found him later understood immediately. There was no confusion in the scene, only resolution. The story would be told many times, yet always in a subdued voice, not as a tale of victory or defeat, but of constancy. He had lived as he fought, bound by promise, steady to the end. And as the sun rose over the land he had guarded, the silence he left behind felt less like absence and more like completion, the final stillness after a long, unbroken effort. Morning came gently across the hills. The light spread slowly over the grass, touching the stone where Cú Chulainn still stood. For a time, nothing moved around him. The land did not hurry to acknowledge what had happened. Birds crossed the sky as they always had, and the river nearby continued its quiet flow. Travelers were the first to notice. They approached carefully, unsure at a distance whether the figure before them was living or carved. Only when they stood near did they understand. The straps held him upright, his posture unchanged, his face calm and untroubled. They did not disturb him immediately. Instead they waited, speaking softly among themselves. Even strangers recognized the weight of the moment. Word began to move outward, carried by footsteps rather than shouts. By midday, people from nearby settlements gathered. No one pushed forward quickly. Each approached with the same hesitation, as though sudden movement might break something fragile. Warriors removed their helmets. Elders bowed their heads slightly. Children stayed quiet without being told. No one spoke of battle. They spoke instead of memory, small recollections of encounters, sightings, and moments when his presence had brought reassurance. Each person seemed to hold a different piece of the same understanding. Eventually they loosened the bindings and lowered him gently. The act was careful and deliberate. Even in death, respect followed the same customs he had lived by. His weapons were placed beside him, not as trophies but as belongings. Messengers carried news back to Ulster. The journey took time, and with each mile the story changed subtly, not through exaggeration, but through reflection. People described his steadiness, his patience, his refusal to fall. The details remained quiet, yet the meaning deepened. When the news reached the settlement, work paused. Not entirely, animals still needed tending, but movement slowed, conversations shortened. The day continued, yet carried a different rhythm. Those who had fought beside him did not weep loudly. Instead they sat together, recalling long days at the borders and nights when his watchfulness allowed others to sleep. Their grief was steady rather than sharp. Preparation for burial followed tradition. The place was chosen carefully, neither grand nor hidden. The ground was firm and open to the sky. Tools struck soil in measured motion. No haste entered the work. During this time, stories were spoken aloud so they would not fade. Each telling was simple, avoiding praise that felt too heavy. The focus remained on what he had done rather than what he had been called. When he was laid to rest, silence settled naturally. No long speeches marked the moment. Presence itself was enough. People stood together until standing became difficult, then slowly departed. Afterward, the land resumed its familiar patterns. Paths filled again, voices returned. Yet something subtle remained. Those who passed the place walked a little quieter, as though remembering without deciding to. In the evenings, children asked questions. The answers were gentle and brief. He had defended the land. He had kept his word. He had stood when he could no longer move. Nothing more needed saying. Seasons shifted. Grass grew over disturbed soil. The site blended back into the wider landscape. Only memory distinguished it from surrounding ground. His absence changed little outwardly. Fields were still worked. Borders still watched. But confidence now came from shared effort, rather than one presence. Others stepped forward, not replacing him but continuing the duty. Stories traveled beyond Ulster, carried by traders and visitors. In distant places, listeners heard not of conquest, but of endurance. The quiet nature of the tale gave it longevity. It did not demand attention. It invited reflection. Years passed, and those who remembered him directly grew fewer. Yet the story remained steady because it was simple. A person had lived according to his promises and ended as he had lived, upright, calm, and unwavering. Even when details faded, the feeling remained. Not sorrow exactly, and not pride alone, but a recognition that some lives leave a stillness behind them, and in that stillness his presence lingered gently, carried not in monuments, but in the quiet understanding of those who continued walking the same land he once guarded. The night after the final battle did not arrive with thunder, nor with the songs of triumph that bards usually promise to heroes. Instead, it came quietly, like mist drifting across a meadow. In Ulster, people slept uneasily without knowing exactly why. Dogs whimpered in their dreams. Fires burned lower than usual. Somewhere beyond the fields and rivers, tied upright to a standing stone so that he would not fall, the greatest defender of the land waited for morning he would never see. Cú Chulainn had always lived as if time were running ahead of him. Even as a child he hurried toward destiny, outracing boys older and stronger, refusing rest, refusing caution. Now, for the first time, the world moved faster than he did. The wind shifted around his still body, brushing his hair across his face, as though the land itself tried gently to wake him. But heroes in old stories do not wake again once the spear has done its work. The Morrigan, the watcher of endings, lingered nearby in the shape of a crow. She had warned him before, offered help he would not accept, and tested him as fate required. Yet even she did not cry out in victory. Her silence was almost respectful. The tragedy of Cú Chulainn was never that he lost. It was that he could only ever move forward, never aside. Morning came softly. Farmers leading cattle to pasture found the body first. They did not approach immediately. Even in death he looked unbreakable, bound upright, eyes still open toward the horizon, as if guarding the border from enemies that had already gone home. One man finally stepped closer. Only when a raven landed on his shoulder did they understand. Word traveled slowly across Ulster, not by trumpet, not by proclamation, but by the small changes people felt. The strange stillness of roads once considered safe. The nervous quiet of travelers who no longer heard the distant shout of a warrior practicing at dawn. For years, mothers had told children, "Sleep well, sweep well, Cú Chulainn guards us." Now they simply said, "Sleep." The king ordered mourning, but grief did not behave like a ceremony. It settled instead into everyday tasks. Women baking bread paused longer at the ovens. Shepherds counted their flocks twice. Even warriors sharpened their weapons less eagerly, knowing the shield that never failed them was gone. His foster father, Conqueror, sat longer than usual before speaking to anyone. There were many heroes in Ireland, many strong fighters, many brave men, but only one who stood alone at the ford so others could rest, and rest was what he never truly had. The bards gathered, but their songs came slowly. Cú Chulainn's life was difficult to shape into simple praise. He had been glorious, yes, but also restless, bound by Gisa, those strange sacred promises that guided him into danger again and again. Every victory carried the shadow of the next battle. Every feast ended with the certainty that another army would someday come, so they chose not to sing loudly. Instead, they told quieter stories. They told of the boy who insisted on playing with warriors before he was tall enough to hold a spear properly. They told of how he apologized after defeating older fighters, because he only wanted to belong among them. They told of his love for Emma, gentle and patient, who understood that she had married not just a man but a destiny that would keep taking him away. In these softer tales, listeners found a different hero, not unstoppable, but human, almost tired beneath the armor. At the ford, where he made his last stand, grass eventually grew again. Blood fed the soil, and seasons did what seasons always do. Travelers crossing there would sometimes pause without knowing why. The air felt heavier, as if holding memory. Children born years later played beside that water. They skipped stones across its surface, laughing, unaware they stood where armies once hesitated to advance because one young man stood in their path. That is how legends become gentle, not by forgetting violence, but by letting time smooth its edges. Even the Morrigan left the place eventually. Fate had been fulfilled, and her role ended, as it always does, without celebration. Heroes fall, kingdoms continue, and stories remain to remind people that strength is often just stubbornness guided by loyalty. In Ulster, seasons continued. Harvests came, winters passed, new warriors trained, yet no one again fought quite the same way. Cú Chulainn had fought as though he alone could hold back the future. Those who followed learned instead to stand together. Perhaps that was his final gift. Not victory, not even protection, but the quiet understanding that no single person can guard a world forever. At night, when fires burned low, storytellers still spoke his name, but the tone softened over generations. The rage of battle faded from memory faster than the image of a boy running toward a destiny he did not fully understand. People remembered how young he always seemed, and they remembered how he never stepped away. So when the wind moved through the hills of Ulster, rustling the grass beside the old standing stone, some listeners imagined it was not merely air passing through. It sounded almost like breath after long effort, the kind taken when finally allowed to rest. The land he guarded did not forget him. Rivers kept flowing past the ford. Roads remained open. Children grew up unafraid to travel beyond their villages. Life, ordinary and peaceful, slowly covered the marks of war. This, in the end, was the gentle tragedy of Cú Chulainn. He lived fiercely so others could live quietly. Yet he himself never knew that quiet until the very last moment. Standing upright beneath a pale sky, watching a dawn he would not greet. And perhaps that is why his story was told before sleep. Not to stir the heart into excitement, but to remind listeners that even the brightest blaze becomes a calm ember, and even the loudest hero becomes a whisper, carried through time. So the tale ends, not with a clash of swords, but with stillness. The fields of Ulster lie under evening light. The ford reflects the sky. A crow passes overhead and continues on its way. Somewhere, a child drifts to sleep while an old voice finishes the story softly, almost tenderly, letting the past settle like dust upon a road long traveled. And at last, Cú Chulainn rests,